February 14th, 1943. 29,000 feet above Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands, through the crystal-clear canopy of his Mitsubishi A6M0, Lieutenant Takeo Tanimizu couldn't suppress his laughter. Below him, climbing laboriously through the tropical air, came the strangest fighter aircraft he had ever witnessed in 3 years of Pacific combat. The American plane looked broken. Its wings bent upward in the middle, like a seagull in flight, giving it an awkward, unfinished appearance. Its massive nose, housing the largest engine Tanimizu had ever seen on a single-engine fighter, seemed too heavy for the airframe. The long nose blocked forward visibility so severely that the pilot appeared to be flying blind. "They send us their rejects," Tanimizu transmitted to his wingman, his voice crackling with amusement. "Look at those wings. The Americans have run out of proper aircraft and now send us their damaged ones." The 16 Zeros of the Tainan Air Group, Japan's most elite fighter unit, circled like sharks above the lumbering American fighters. These pilots were aces, veterans of Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and a dozen carrier battles. They had destroyed hundreds of Allied aircraft. They flew the Zero, the most maneuverable fighter in the world, a machine that had dominated Pacific skies for over a year. What Tanimizu didn't know, what none of the Japanese pilots circling confidently above could have imagined, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically annihilate Japanese naval aviation. Within 18 months, this bent-wing monstrosity would achieve a kill ratio of 11-1 against Japanese fighters. Within 2 years, it would be known throughout the Pacific as Whistling Death. And within 3 years, Japanese pilots would refuse to engage it, choosing instead to dive away and flee. The Vought F4U Corsair, initially rejected by the U.S. Navy as too dangerous to fly, was about to rewrite every assumption about fighter combat. Its bent wings weren't a defect, they were a revolutionary solution to an engineering problem. And those wings would carry American pilots to complete air superiority over the Pacific. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in that strange airframe. 2,250 horsepower, 417 miles per hour, top speed 6. 50 caliber machine guns with 2,400 rounds, and a climb rate that would leave Japanese fighters gasping for altitude. This is the story of how Japanese laughter turned to terror, how inverted gull wings revolutionized naval aviation, and how one aircraft transformed from a rejected prototype into the most feared fighter in the Pacific theater. The Vought F4U Corsair emerged from a crisis of faith in American naval aviation. In 1940, as Japanese Zeros slaughtered Chinese fighters with impunity, the U.S. Navy realized its current carrier fighters were already obsolete before entering combat. The Navy's specification, issued in February 1938, demanded the impossible, a carrier-based fighter faster than any land-based fighter, with better range than any existing naval aircraft, carrying heavier armament than contemporary bombers, all while operating from carrier decks measuring just 800 feet. Rex Beisel, Vought Aircraft's chief designer, studied the requirements and reached a radical conclusion. "We need the most powerful engine available," he told his team. Everything else follows from that decision. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower. Later models would exceed 2,250 horsepower. No other fighter engine in the world approached this power. But this engine created immediate problems. To efficiently convert that massive horsepower into thrust, the Corsair needed a propeller over 13 feet in diameter, the largest propeller ever fitted to a fighter aircraft. And here the engineering challenge became acute. For adequate ground clearance, such a large propeller required either impossibly long landing gear or an alternative solution. Conventional straight wings would need landing gear over 7 feet tall, making carrier operations suicidal. Beisel's solution was unprecedented inverted gull wings. The wings angled downward from the fuselage, then bent upward at the landing gear attachment points. This configuration allowed shorter, stronger landing gear while maintaining propeller clearance. It reduced drag at the wing fuselage junction. It optimized airflow to the massive engine cowling. The design was brilliant, it was also bizarre. When the F4U prototype first flew on May 29, 1940, test pilot Lyman A. Bullard Jr. reached 405 miles per hour in level flight, the first American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour. The performance was extraordinary, the handling was terrifying. The long nose created a forward visibility problem so severe that pilots couldn't see the carrier deck during approach. The aircraft bounced dangerously on landing. It had a tendency to snap into uncontrolled rolls. The stall characteristics were vicious, with little warning before the aircraft departed controlled flight. The U.S. Navy, desperate for performance but terrified of casualties, made a fateful decision in 1942. The Corsair was unsuitable for carrier operations. It would be relegated to land-based Marine squadrons in the Pacific. This rejection sent the Corsair to the most aggressive, least risk-averse pilots in American service. The Marines would take the dangerous bent-wing fighter and turn it into a legend. Meanwhile, Japanese naval aviation was celebrating unbroken victory. The Mitsubishi A6M0 had achieved mythical status by early 1943. Lightweight, supremely maneuverable, with exceptional range, it had destroyed every opponent it faced. American Wildcats, British Hurricanes, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes all fell to zero pilots who had trained for years before the war. Japanese pilots approached combat with samurai philosophy and technical excellence. They practiced formation flying until units moved as single organisms. They studied dogfighting maneuvers until they could execute them instinctively. Many had combat experience in China dating back to 1937. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's highest-scoring surviving ace, would later write, "In 1943, we believed no American fighter could match the Zero. We had superior maneuverability, superior pilots, and years of combat experience. When we first saw the Corsair, we laughed. It looked like someone had built it incorrectly." The Zero's specifications supported Japanese confidence: 331 miles per hour top speed, climb rate of 4,500 feet per minute. Turning radius so tight it could literally fly circles around American fighters. Its two 20mm cannons could destroy enemy aircraft with single hits. What Japanese pilots didn't understand was that they were still fighting the previous generation of American fighters. The Corsair wasn't trying to outturn the Zero. It was designed to dominate through speed, power, and firepower, a fundamentally different approach to air combat. On February 13, 1943, Marine Fighter Squadron 124, VMF-124, arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal with the first operational Corsairs in the Pacific Theater. The squadron commander, Major William E. Gies, briefed his pilots on their new aircraft. "Gentlemen, this aircraft will kill you if you're careless," Gies announced. "It has more power than you've ever experienced. The visibility is terrible, the landing characteristics are unforgiving, but if you master it, nothing in the Japanese inventory can touch you." Among the pilots listening was Second Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh, a former enlisted pilot who would become the first Corsair ace and eventually claim 21 victories. Walsh's first flight in the Corsair nearly ended in disaster. "The torque on takeoff tried to flip me into the ocean," Walsh later recalled. "The nose came up so fast I couldn't see anything. I climbed to altitude and tried some maneuvers. The power was unbelievable, like strapping yourself to a rocket. But the aircraft wanted to kill you. Every mistake was amplified." For 2 weeks, VMF-124 practiced, losing 3 aircraft to landing accidents but 0 to enemy action. The pilots learned to approach carriers in a curved pattern to maintain visual contact with the deck. They learned to manage the massive torque. They learned that the Corsair's speed was its greatest weapon. On February 14th, they would meet the Zero for the first time. The mission brief was straightforward: escort SBD Dauntless dive bombers attacking Japanese positions on Bougainville. Intelligence reported 12 to 16 Zeros based at Kahili Airfield. The Marines expected contact. At 0730 hours, 12 Corsairs lifted off from Henderson Field. The takeoff itself demonstrated American industrial philosophy. Each aircraft consumed more fuel in the first 5 minutes than a Zero burned in 30. But what the Corsairs lacked in efficiency, they compensated for in raw power. Lieutenant Walsh led the 2nd Division, climbing to 29,000 feet, higher than the bombers needed, but exactly where Walsh wanted to be. He had studied reports from China and calculated that altitude advantage would be decisive against the more maneuverable Zeros. "Stay fast. Stay high," Walsh transmitted. "If they're below us, we dive." If they're above us, we climb. Never, ever try to turn with them. The Japanese interceptors appeared exactly where intelligence predicted. 16 Zeros from the Tainan Air Group climbing to meet the bombers at 18,000 feet. The Marine Corsairs had 11,000 feet of altitude advantage, and Walsh immediately understood what that meant. Divisions, prepare to attack. We're going down. What happened next shocked the Japanese pilots who survived to report it. The Corsairs didn't dogfight. They dove from 29,000 feet, accelerating to speeds the Zeros couldn't match. Walsh's division reached 450 miles per hour in the dive, 100 miles per hour faster than a Zero's maximum speed in level flight. The first Zero never saw the attack. Walsh opened fire at 400 yards, his 6.50 caliber machine guns converging in a cone of destruction. The Zero disintegrated, its lightweight construction unable to withstand the impact of multiple half-inch bullets striking at 2,800 feet per second. Walsh didn't turn to engage other targets. Following his own tactical doctrine, he extended the dive, using his speed to climb back to altitude. 2 minutes later, he was above the furball again, ready for another diving pass. Lieutenant Tanimizu found himself in a nightmare scenario. The American fighters were above him, diving too fast to intercept, climbing too powerfully to pursue. When he tried to engage, they simply accelerated away. When he climbed to meet them, they dove past him at speeds that made deflection shooting impossible. We couldn't catch them, Tanimizu would report in his combat diary. They dove through our formation at incredible speed, fired, and climbed away before we could react. Our maneuverability advantage was meaningless because they refused to fight on our terms. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. The Marines claimed 4 confirmed kills with 2 probables. They lost no aircraft to enemy action, though 1 Corsair crashed on landing back at Henderson, the aircraft's unforgiving handling claiming another victim. But the combat reports from both sides revealed something more significant than the score. The Japanese had encountered a fighter that operated by completely different rules. The Corsair didn't outturn opponents, it outpowered them. It didn't outmaneuver them, it outclimbed them. It didn't engage in extended dogfights. It made high-speed slashing attacks and escape before retaliation was possible. Japanese naval headquarters received Tanimizu's report with skepticism. Pilot error. And the analysis concluded, the Zero's superiority in maneuverability remains absolute. Pilots must close to gun range and use superior turning capability. This assessment would prove catastrophically wrong. Over the following weeks, more Corsair squadrons arrived in the Solomons. VMF-121, VMF-122, VMF-213 each brought more of the bent wing fighters, and with each engagement, Marine pilots refined their tactics. The doctrine became formalized: never slow down, never turn with Zeros, use a speed and altitude. Make 1 pass, then extend. Climb back to advantage. Repeat. Lieutenant Walsh demonstrated the tactic's effectiveness on May 13, 1943, during an escort mission over New Georgia. His division of 4 Corsairs encountered 12 Zeros at 23,000 feet. We were actually below them this time, Walsh recalled, but we had speed from the climb. I led my division in a slight climb, building energy, then rolled inverted and pulled through into a diving attack. The maneuver, later called a high-side gun pass, brought Walsh's Corsair screaming down at a 45-degree angle, all 6 guns blazing. The targeted Zero exploded, victim of 2,400 rounds per minute of combined firepower. Walsh's wingman, Lieutenant Frank Drury, followed immediately, claiming a second Zero. The remaining Japanese fighters turned to engage, but the Corsairs were already 5,000 feet below them and accelerating. The Marines climbed away, regained altitude, and repeated the attack. By the time the engagement ended, Walsh's division had claimed 5 Zeros destroyed without taking a single hit. The tactic was proving devastatingly effective. Japanese pilots began reporting a disturbing pattern. The American fighters wouldn't fight honorably. They attacked from impossible angles, at impossible speeds, then disappeared before retaliation was possible. The Zero's legendary maneuverability, its ability to outturn any opponent, became irrelevant when opponents refused to turn. More troubling still were the Corsairs' ballistic characteristics. The 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, generated a combined weight of fire that simply shredded Japanese aircraft. Each gun fired 800 rounds per minute, total 4,800 rounds per minute. With 6 guns firing, a 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into the target zone. The Corsair could maintain fire for 20 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The ammunition mix itself was devastating: armor-piercing incendiary, armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and ball ammunition in carefully calculated ratios. A PI rounds penetrated structure, then ignited. Tracers marked fall of shot. Ball ammunition provided mass and impact. Against the Zero's lightweight construction, no armor plate, no self-sealing fuel tanks, minimal structural redundancy, this firepower was catastrophic. Zeros didn't just go down when hit, they disintegrated. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, shot down by a Corsair on August 7, 1943, survived to describe the experience. The American fighter made one pass. I saw the tracers and tried to turn inside them. The shells struck my aircraft like hammers. My canopy shattered. My engine exploded. The wing folded. I bailed out with the aircraft in pieces around me. One pass, one attack, total destruction. By June 1943, Japanese intelligence had compiled comprehensive reports on the Corsair. The analysis made grim reading. Vought F4U Corsair specifications. Maximum speed, 417 miles per hour at 19,900 feet. Climb rate, 2,890 feet per minute. Service ceiling, 36,900 feet. Range, 1,015 miles. Armament, 6.50 caliber machine guns, 2,400 rounds total. Armor, pilot protected by armor plate and bulletproof glass. Fuel tanks, self-sealing, fire-resistant. Comparison to Zero, 86 miles per hour faster in level flight. Similar climb rate, but with vastly more power for zoom climbs. 2,000 feet higher operational ceiling. Double the ammunition capacity. Heavily armored versus unarmored. Protected fuel systems versus vulnerable tanks. The report concluded the Corsair cannot outmaneuver the Zero in turning combat. However, it refuses to engage in turning combat. Its superior speed, firepower, and structural strength make conventional interception tactics ineffective. Japanese naval headquarters ordered tactical revisions. Zeros would attack in pairs, one engaging while the other remained high to dive on Corsairs attempting boom and zoom attacks. They would use superior numbers to force turning engagements. They would attack bombers despite fighter escorts, forcing the Corsairs to slow down and defend. Nothing worked. The fundamental problem was energy warfare, a concept American pilots had systematically studied while Japanese training emphasized traditional dogfighting. The Corsair could convert altitude to speed and speed to altitude more efficiently than the Zero. In any engagement, the Corsair pilot controlled when to fight and when to disengage. If the Japanese stayed high, Corsairs attacked from even higher. If Japanese dove away, Corsairs chased them down with superior speed. If Japanese tried to escape by climbing, Corsairs followed with superior power. The only successful Japanese tactic was to refuse combat entirely, diving away at the first sight of Corsairs and hoping their head start would be sufficient. This worked for survival but made mission completion impossible. By autumn 1943, the Corsairs' reputation had spread throughout Japanese naval aviation. Pilots who survived encounters reported the same patterns: devastating speed, overwhelming firepower, aggressive tactics, and absolute refusal to fight by Japanese rules. The bent-wing fighter that Japanese pilots had mocked 9 months earlier was now feared above all other American aircraft. They had developed a nickname for it, whispered with dread in ready rooms across the Pacific: Whistling Death, for the distinctive sound made by wind through the wing root intakes at high speed. The sound terrified Japanese pilots because it meant a Corsair was diving on them at 400+ miles per hour, and there was nothing they could do about it. The kill ratio statistics told a story that Japanese commanders couldn't ignore. Through 1943 and into 1944, Corsair squadrons were achieving results that defied pre-war assumptions about aerial combat. VMF 124's final Pacific tour statistics: 68 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 8 Corsairs lost in combat, 8.5 to 1 kill ratio. VMF121, 164 kills, 11 combat losses, 14.9 to 1 kill ratio. VMF214, the Black Sheep Squadron led by Major Gregory Pappy Boyington, 126 kills in 84 days, 6 combat losses, 21 to 1 kill ratio. The overall Corsair kill ratio through the war would reach 11.3 to 1, the highest of any American fighter in the Pacific theater. For every Corsair lost to Japanese fighters, 11 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. These numbers represented more than tactical success. They demonstrated complete psychological and technical dominance. Japanese pilots were being outflown, outfought, and systematically eliminated by an aircraft they had initially dismissed as defective. The Corsairs' evolution continued throughout 1943 and 1944. Vought engineers addressed the carrier landing problems that had initially caused Navy rejection. The F4U variant featured a raised cockpit providing better forward visibility. The stall characteristics were softened through aerodynamic refinements. Landing gear was strengthened to handle the brutal carrier landings. By April 1944, the Navy finally cleared the Corsair for carrier operations. The aircraft that had been rejected as too dangerous would ultimately serve on 17 fleet carriers and numerous escort carriers, becoming the Navy's premier carrier fighter. Meanwhile, Corsair performance continued improving. The F4U variant mounted 4 20mm cannons instead of machine guns, transforming it into a bomber killer. The F4U added underwing racks for rockets and bombs, creating a multi-role fighter bomber. The F4U featured a 2,450 horsepower engine, pushing top speed to 446 miles per hour. Each improvement widened the performance gap over Japanese fighters. The Zero remained essentially unchanged from 1942 specifications, a victim of Japan's shrinking industrial capacity and inability to develop new engines. Japanese attempts to create new fighters, the Kawanishi N1K George, the Mitsubishi J2M Jack, came too late and in too few numbers to matter. On June 19, 1944, Commander Roger Hedrick led VF-84, a Navy Corsair squadron from USS Bunker Hill, against massive Japanese raids. His combat report was clinical. Contact at 25,000 feet. Executed diving attack. Observed 4 enemy aircraft destroyed. Climbed to altitude. Repeated attack. 3 more destroyed. No American losses. That day, American fighters destroyed 476 Japanese aircraft while losing 30 to all causes, a 15:9 to 1 ratio that essentially ended Japanese carrier aviation as an effective force. Corsairs accounted for a significant portion of these kills, demonstrating that the aircraft originally rejected for carrier duty now excelled in that role. Japanese pilot quality had declined catastrophically. By mid-1944, veteran Japanese pilots were dead or grounded by fuel shortages. Replacements received minimal training, often less than 100 flight hours before combat. These inexperienced pilots and obsolete aircraft faced American veterans and superior fighters. The results were predictable and tragic. Japanese formations were massacred. Individual Japanese pilots survived combat measured in seconds rather than minutes. The experienced Japanese pilots who remained understood they were flying to certain death. Lieutenant Junior Grade Toshio Yoshitake, one of the few surviving Zero pilots with significant experience, kept a diary discovered after the war. July 15th, 1944. We launched 12 fighters against American bombers. The Corsairs dove on us before we reached the bombers. In 5 minutes, 8 of our aircraft were destroyed. The Corsairs lost nothing. They are too fast, too powerful, too well-armored. We cannot hurt them. They destroy us at will. The Corsair demonstrated another critical advantage: survivability. Heavily armored with self-sealing fuel tanks and robust construction, Corsairs routinely returned from missions with damage that would have destroyed Japanese aircraft. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh, already an ace multiple times over, survived an encounter on August 30th, 1943, that demonstrated Corsair toughness. His F4U took hits from 3 Zeros simultaneously, 21 cannon shells, and over 100 machine gun rounds. The engine continued running despite direct hits. The airframe held together despite structural damage. Walsh flew 175 miles back to base and landed safely. They pumped enough ammunition into my Corsair to destroy 3 Zeros. Walsh reported, "The aircraft absorbed it all and brought me home. That's when I understood why we were winning. Not just better tactics or better training, but better aircraft that let us survive mistakes. Japanese industry couldn't match this durability." Zero production emphasized lightness and simplicity to maximize performance and manufacturing efficiency. The result was aircraft that flew beautifully but died easily. A single .50 caliber hit could down a Zero. A Corsair required sustained fire from multiple guns. By 1945, the strategic situation had become hopeless for Japan. The Corsair dominated wherever it appeared. Marine squadrons flying Corsairs from captured Pacific islands interdicted Japanese shipping, destroyed ground targets, and massacred the few Japanese aircraft that still flew. The statistics from Okinawa illustrated total American air dominance. From April to June 1945, Corsairs flew 8,520 combat sorties, destroyed 582 Japanese aircraft, lost 47 Corsairs to all causes, including ground fire and accidents. Only 12 lost to Japanese fighters. Achieved 48.5 to 1 kill ratio against Japanese fighters specifically. These numbers weren't combat, they were extermination. The kamikaze campaign, Japan's final desperate aerial tactic, represented implicit admission that conventional aerial combat was hopeless. Japanese pilots couldn't win dogfights against Corsairs, so they tried to crash into American ships instead. Even this tactic often failed when Corsairs intercepted kamikaze formations before they reached the fleet. On April 16, 1945, Corsairs from VMF 323 intercepted a kamikaze raid of 16 aircraft approaching the fleet off Okinawa. The Marines destroyed all 16 attackers before any reached their targets, a perfect interception that would have been impossible without the Corsairs' speed and climb rate. By war's end, Vought had produced 12,571 Corsairs, more than any other fighter except the P-51 Mustang in American service. These aircraft equipped 19 Marine squadrons, 19 Navy squadrons, and were also flown by Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm squadrons in the Pacific. The Corsairs' combat record was extraordinary by any measure. 2,140 confirmed air-to-air victories. 11.3 to 1 overall kill ratio. 189 Corsair aces, pilots with 5+ victories. Only 189 Corsairs lost to enemy aircraft. Perhaps most remarkably, the Corsair continued frontline service long after World War II ended. It fought in Korea from 1950 to 1953, primarily as a ground attack aircraft, and remained in service with some air forces until 1965, a 25-year combat career that testified to the design's fundamental excellence. In prisoner of war interrogations conducted by U.S. intelligence from 1943 through 1945, captured Japanese pilots provided remarkably candid assessments of the Corsair. These testimonies, discovered in National Archives records decades later, reveal the psychological impact of facing an aircraft that shattered Japanese assumptions about aerial combat. Lieutenant Commander Naoshi Kano, one of Japan's highest-scoring aces with 52 victories, was shot down by a Corsair in October 1944. His interrogation transcript provides devastating analysis. The Corsair changed everything. In 1942 and early 1943, we dominated because we could force turning engagements where the Zero's superiority was absolute. The Wildcat and P-40 had to turn with us or die trying. The Corsair refused. It dove from above, attacked with overwhelming firepower, then climbed away before we could respond. Our maneuverability meant nothing because we couldn't force engagement on our terms. Worse, the Corsair pilots were aggressive. They hunted us. They didn't wait for us to attack bombers. They came looking for fighters. This offensive mindset, combined with superior speed and firepower, made survival nearly impossible. The only successful tactic was to refuse combat entirely. But this meant abandoning our mission, which meant losing the war slowly instead of quickly. There are too many places. These observations, repeated with variations by dozens of captured pilots, revealed that Japanese aircrew understood the tactical situation clearly. They simply had no solutions. Senior Japanese commanders also grasped the implications. Admiral Matomi Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet during the final year of the war, wrote in his diary, March 3, 1945. Intelligence reports American Corsair production has exceeded 10,000 aircraft. We face not merely tactical superiority, but industrial annihilation. For every Corsair destroyed, 3 more arrive. Our replacement rate cannot approach 1/10 of losses. The Corsair represents American philosophy, overwhelming force through industrial capacity. They did not build the most maneuverable fighter. They built a fighter that doesn't need maneuverability because it dominates through speed, firepower, and armor. We laughed at those bent wings in 1943. Now they darken our skies. The technical comparison between the Corsair and its Japanese opponents illustrated the widening gap. F4U Corsair 1945 model. Engine 2,450 horsepower. Speed 446 miles per hour. Ceiling 41,500 feet. Rate of climb 3,870 feet per minute. Armament 6.50 caliber MGs or 420mm cannon. Armor comprehensive pilot protection. Range 1,560 miles with drop tanks. A 6M50 1945 model. Engine 1,130 horsepower. Speed 351 miles per hour. Ceiling 38,500 feet. Rate of climb 3,150 feet per minute. Armament 220mm cannon, 2 machine guns. Armor none. Range 1,194 miles. The Corsair's power advantage more than double the Zero's horsepower, translated into dominance in every performance category that mattered in 1944 to 45 combat: speed, climb rate, and energy retention. Japanese attempts to develop competitive fighters came too late. The Kawanishi N1K2J, George, introduced in late 1944, was fast and well-armed but produced in numbers too small to impact the war, fewer than 400 total. The Mitsubishi J-2M Jack Interceptor matched the Corsair's climb rate but not its speed or numbers. More fundamentally, by 1944, Japan lacked the fuel to train pilots adequately, the raw materials to build aircraft in necessary quantities, and the industrial capacity to match American production rates. The technical gap was real, but the industrial gap was decisive. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope of American industrial dominance. In 1944 alone, the United States produced 96,318 aircraft of all types. Japan produced 28,180. American production exceeded Japanese output by more than 3-to-1, and American aircraft were generally superior in performance. The Corsair exemplified this industrial approach, complex and expensive by Japanese standards, requiring 22,000 man-hours to build, versus 15,000 for a Zero. American factories produced them faster than Japan could build simpler fighters. Mass production techniques, abundant materials, and unlimited resources created overwhelming numerical superiority. Japanese survivors of the air war reflected bitterly on this disparity. Captain Minoru Genda, one of Japan's most brilliant tactical minds and a planner of the Pearl Harbor attack, stated in a 1950 interview, "We understood aircraft design. The Zero proved that. It was an excellent fighter for 1942, but we never understood American methods." They didn't build perfect aircraft. They built good enough aircraft in overwhelming numbers. The Corsair had problems initially: carrier landing difficulties, visibility issues, harsh handling. Any Japanese design with such flaws would be rejected or endlessly refined. Americans accepted the flaws, implemented solutions, and produced thousands while we were still planning improvements. That bent wing design we mocked? It was brilliant engineering that we didn't recognize. It solved a real problem: propeller clearance, with an elegant solution that also reduced drag. We laughed because it looked strange. We should have been terrified because it worked. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots extended beyond individual combat encounters. Surviving airmen knew they were expendable, their deaths certain, their sacrifice meaningless in the face of American material superiority. Ensign Yasunori Aoki, assigned to a kamikaze unit in April 1945, left a letter discovered after the war that captured this despair. "Tomorrow I will die attacking the American fleet. I will not reach my target. The Corsairs will intercept us as they always do. They are too fast, too many, too well armed. We cannot evade them. This is not a tactical mission, but ritual suicide. We die not because our deaths serve Japan, but because death in battle is preferable to the shame of surrender or the horror of invasion. The Americans and their Corsairs are not evil. They are simply better equipped, better trained, and fighting for a nation that can supply their needs. We are samurai with swords facing soldiers with machine guns. Courage is irrelevant against such disparity. This letter, never sent, was found among Aoki's personal effects after his unit was destroyed by Corsairs on April 12, 1945, exactly as he predicted. The final statistics of Corsair operations in World War II stand as testament to one of the most successful fighter aircraft ever built. Combat record: 2,140 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat. 189 Corsair aces produced. 11.3 to 1 kill ratio overall. 48.5 to 1 ratio versus Japanese fighters, specifically at Okinawa. 64,051 combat sorties flown. Only 189 losses to enemy aircraft. 12,571 aircraft produced. Comparative kill ratios: Pacific Theater. F4U Corsair, 11.3 to 1. F6F Hellcat, 19 to 1, primarily against poorly trained late-war Japanese pilots. P-38 Lightning, 2.1 to 1. P-47 Thunderbolt, 2.7 to 1. The Hellcat's higher ratio reflected its role in the 1944-45 period when Japanese pilot quality had catastrophically declined. The Corsair achieved its ratio across the entire war, including 1943 when facing experienced Japanese veterans, making its record arguably more impressive. In 1983, a reunion brought together American Corsair pilots and surviving Japanese naval aviators in San Diego. The event, filmed by military historians, included remarkable exchanges between former enemies. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh, by then a retired brigadier general with the Medal of Honor for his Corsair exploits, met Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, the legendary Japanese ace he had fought against in 1943. Sakai's comments, translated and recorded, provided closure to the story that began with Japanese mockery. When we first saw the Corsair, we laughed at those bent wings. We thought the Americans had sent us their damaged aircraft. We were fools. Those wings were not a defect, but innovation. They solved an engineering problem we never considered because we never attempted such a powerful engine in a carrier fighter. The Americans thought bigger, built bigger, and dominated because they understood modern warfare better than we did. The Corsair was faster than any Japanese fighter, climbed better, dove faster, and carried more ammunition. But the real advantage was the pilot training and tactical doctrine. American pilots used their aircraft strengths and avoided weaknesses. We tried to force them into turning fights they refused to engage in. I was shot down by a Corsair. I survived only because the pilot probably ran out of ammunition. My Zero was destroyed in seconds. That was the Corsair's true terror. Devastating effectiveness combined with overwhelming numbers. We fought bravely. You fought intelligently. Bravery cannot defeat intelligence supported by industrial might. Walsh's response revealed the respect American pilots had developed for their opponents. The Japanese pilots we faced in 1943 were the best in the world. Experienced, skilled, and fearless. We won not because we were better pilots, but because we had better tools and used them correctly. The Corsair let us dictate combat terms. That made all the difference. The bent-wing fighter that Japanese pilots had mocked became the symbol of American technological and industrial superiority in the Pacific. Its distinctive silhouette, wings angled like a seagull in flight, represented not a defect, but deliberate engineering excellence. The Corsair continued serving long after World War II ended. Korean War, 1950 to 1953. Primarily ground attack, but still scoring air victories. French service, Indochina War through 1954. Honduran Air Force final retirement in 1969, 24 years after World War II ended. This longevity testified to the design's fundamental soundness. An aircraft rejected as too dangerous for carrier operations in 1942 remained combat effective through 3 wars and 4 decades. The engineering lessons influenced subsequent fighter design worldwide. Power-to-weight ratio became paramount. Speed and energy management superseded maneuverability. Firepower concentration proved decisive. Pilot protection became standard. Multi-role capability increased versatility. Modern fighters from the F-15 to the F-22 embody principles the Corsair demonstrated: dominate through speed and power, refuse disadvantageous engagements, attack decisively, and disengage before retaliation. In the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, a restored F4U Corsair sits among other legendary aircraft. Its placard lists specifications and battle honors, but the real story is told in a display case containing a piece of zero-wing skin punctured by 50 caliber holes and a quote from an unnamed Japanese pilot recorded in 1945 interrogation transcripts. "We laughed when we first saw the Corsair. The bent wings looked wrong, broken somehow. The Americans, we thought, had built their fighter incorrectly. We stopped laughing when we understood those wings were not mistakes but solutions. The Americans had solved a problem we never knew existed because we never attempted what they achieved." The Corsair was not the most beautiful fighter. It was not the most maneuverable, but it was the most effective. It killed us with speed we couldn't match, firepower we couldn't survive, and numbers we couldn't overcome. When you heard the whistle of those wing intakes as a Corsair dove on you, you knew death was coming. The sound haunts me still. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable, like everything American. We called it whistling death. The name was accurate. It was death, and it was whistling our requiem. The Japanese pilots who laughed at the Corsair's bent wings in February 1943 were dead within a year, shot down by the aircraft they'd mocked. Their replacements, poorly trained teenagers in obsolete fighters, survived measured in days rather than months. By August 1945, the Corsair ruled Pacific skies so completely that Japanese aircraft rarely flew except for kamikaze missions, suicidal attacks born of desperation and the certain knowledge that conventional combat against Corsairs was hopeless. The bent-wing fighter had proven that innovation often looks strange before it looks brilliant, that American engineering could solve problems through power rather than elegance, and that in modern warfare, industrial capacity ultimately determines victory more than individual skill or tactical genius. The Corsair transformed from rejected prototype to legendary fighter through the skill of Marine and Navy pilots who mastered its difficult handling and exploited its overwhelming advantages. They turned the bent-wing oddity into whistling death, and in doing so, they helped win the Pacific War. The Japanese had laughed at those inverted gull wings in 1943. By 1945, there were no Japanese pilots left to laugh. The Corsair had spoken, and Pacific skies belonged to America. F4U Corsair Legacy. Production: 12,571 aircraft. Combat career: 1943 to 1969, 26 years. Total victories: 2,140 confirmed. Kill ratio: 11.3 to 1 overall. Ace created: 189 pilots. Top speed: 446 miles per hour. F4U-4. Service: USMC USN, Royal Navy, France, Honduras. Japanese assessment: 1945. The most formidable fighter in the Pacific theater. Superior in all aspects except maneuverability, which proved irrelevant in actual combat. Pappy, sauce. Won't die. Japanese Naval Aviation Technical Report, August 1945. The bent wings weren't broken, they were the future.